It was not yet dawn when the illusion of absolute power finally shattered for Queen Camilla. Under the cover of darkness, heavy production trucks, catering vans, and crates of industrial lighting equipment rolled quietly through the iron gates of Balmoral Castle, Britain's most fiercely guarded private royal sanctuary. The commercial film crew unloading their equipment into the historic dining room believed they were operating under full official authorization. They were completely wrong. What Camilla was about to realize behind closed doors is that the power she had spent 3 decades methodically acquiring was entirely fragile. And Princess Anne was about to use the full weight of the British institutional machinery to dismantle it without making a single public sound. This is the story of the ugliest internal scandal the monarchy has faced in modern history. We're going to unpack the secret, highly lucrative power grab executed by Camilla's son, Tom Parker Bowles, right inside the King's private estate. We will look at exactly how Princess Anne uncovered a staggering paper trail of commercial exploitation, and we will examine the silent, ruthless retaliation that followed. By the end of this, you will understand the devastating realization that struck Camilla when the trap finally snapped shut. She may wear the crown, but she actually owns nothing. To understand why this institutional reckoning hit with such catastrophic force, we first have to look at the towering illusion of invincibility Camilla had built around herself. For 30 years, she played a masterclass in long-term survival and psychological dominance. She absorbed the public hatred, engineered the systematic erasure of Diana's legacy from the immediate palace narrative, and slowly elevated her own non-royal children into the very center of the establishment. Camilla operated under the distinct belief that she had King Charles completely controlled. She saw his historic compliance as a guarantee that her family would forever be shielded by the highest levels of the monarchy. She felt entirely untouchable. That dangerous overconfidence trickled directly down to her son, creating a sense of entitlement so blinding that it paved the way for an act of staggering commercial desperation. Tom Parker Bowles had built an entire career dancing on the edges of his mother's royal proximity. But the scheme he orchestrated at Balmoral crossed the line from subtle exploitation into systematic fraud. Tom approached an independent production company with a proposal for a high-end culinary documentary series. The selling point was unprecedented access to Britain's most exclusive aristocratic estates. Tom sat in corporate boardrooms and assured investors with total confidence that, as the Queen Consort's son, he held the absolute authority to open the doors of Balmoral Castle for their cameras. He drafted forged documents designed to look exactly like genuine royal authorization from senior palace officials. Hundreds of thousands of pounds in advance payments flowed directly into his personal accounts. He was selling a royal endorsement he had absolutely no legal or moral right to sell. What Tom had not calculated was the fierce protective devotion of the Princess Royal. Princess Anne arrived at Balmoral completely unannounced on the exact morning Tom's production crew was wiring the historic staterooms for sound and lighting. When Anne walked through those heavy wooden doors, the sight hit her like a physical blow. A full commercial film production had commandeered the very space that held the soul of the royal family. What rose inside Anne in that moment was not simply the cold anger of an aristocrat discovering a property violation. It was a profound moral outrage. This was the castle where Queen Elizabeth II had died. Just a short time prior, Anne had sat at her mother's bedside in these exact rooms, watching the most important person in her life take her final breath. The grand ballroom, now littered with catering stations, was where her mother's coffin had rested. The violation was absolute, and Anne's response was terrifying in its absolute restraint. The staff members presenting noted that while she was physically shaking with fury, she did not scream. Instead, she weaponized her authority. Anne ordered the production to halt immediately and gave every single crew member exactly 1 hour to remove themselves and their equipment from the grounds. Security personnel physically escorted them out. Tom, safely back in London to avoid oversight, had no idea his entire lucrative empire was collapsing in real time. What happened next was not a private family scolding, it was a cold forensic execution of justice. Anne walked away from the eviction and immediately contacted King Charles to ask one simple question. Had he authorized this filming? Caught completely off guard, Charles admitted he knew nothing. With the King's denial secured, Anne went straight to the royal legal team. She did not ask for an internal review. She instructed them to launch a full sweeping legal investigation into every contract Tom had signed, every payment he had received, and every claim of royal authority he had fabricated. As the royal lawyers began pulling the threads apart, they uncovered a deeply entrenched pattern of commercial exploitation. They found forged letters pressured restaurant owners and a decades-long reliance on the implied threat of the Queen Consort's displeasure. But what transformed this from a financial scandal into a total institutional warfare was the alliance forming in the shadows. Prince William carrying his own silent, enduring grief for his mother, and a deep-seated disgust for Tom that stretched back to a suppressed drug scandal in 1999. Quietly backed Anne. William applied immense private pressure on the king to stand aside and let the legal machinery crush the scheme. When the full scope of the investigation reached Camilla, she panicked. She realized that what looked like a routine administrative audit was actually a total dismantling of her family's access. She rushed to Charles, begging him to shut down the lawyers, arguing that a public legal battle would damage the monarchy. But the trap had already snapped shut. She had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the institution she married into. The unwritten rule that protected blood royals was never going to protect her son from Princess Anne's wrath. Camilla was standing at the edge of a precipice, staring at a legally binding paper trail that could destroy her son, and for the first time in 30 years, she realized she had no power to stop it. The realization that hit Camilla in that moment was not just about Tom's legal jeopardy. It was the terrifying dawn of a new reality. She turned to King Charles, the man whose absolute devotion she had wielded like a shield for decades, expecting him to command the storm to stop. She expected him to protect her son, just as he had buried the drug scandals of the past. Instead, she was met with a devastating silence. Charles did not issue a royal command. He did not fire the lawyers, he simply looked away. The king, trapped between the ferocious, righteous indignation of his sister and the quiet, imposing authority of his heir, chose self-preservation. In his refusal to act, Charles silently communicated a truth Camilla had spent a lifetime trying to ignore. Her influence ended where the survival of the crown began. This was the brutal awakening to her own commercial desperation. For years, Camilla had operated as though she was the architect of the monarchy's future. But the Balmoral crisis exposed the hollow core of her empire. She realized that despite the titles, the curtsies, and the velvet ropes, she actually owned nothing. The true wealth of the monarchy, the Duchy of Cornwall, the vast estates, the billion-dollar portfolio had already passed entirely to Prince William. William controlled the purse strings, William controlled the land, and William had no intention of allowing the Parker Bowles family to treat the royal household as a personal ATM. The illusion of her absolute power evaporated, exposing the cold, administrative reality that she was merely a guest in an empire owned by Diana's son. As Camilla scrambled to fund Tom's legal defense from her own dwindling personal resources, a silent changing of the guard was taking place inside the palace walls. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stepped seamlessly into the void, embodying the quiet, uncomplaining sacrifice that the institution demands. The contrast was devastating. While Camilla's bloodline was exposed for staggering exploitation, Catherine was quietly cementing her role as the undisputed matriarch of the future. Catherine did not need to engage in the muddy warfare of legal defense. Her power was absolute precisely because it was rooted in service, duty, and the fierce protection of her own children's inheritance. The retaliation from William and Anne was not loud, but it was absolute, executed through the ruthless weaponization of administrative protocol. Access passes that Tom and his associates had freely used for years were quietly deactivated overnight. A side door at St. James's Palace, long used by the Parker Bowles family to bypass public scrutiny and enter the royal grounds undetected, had its locks changed without warning or explanation, and in a subtle but devastating visual humiliation, a prominent portrait of Camilla's family that had rested in a private drawing room at Windsor was quietly boxed up and moved into storage. It was replaced by a striking archival photograph of a young Princess Anne and King Charles. That detail matters. It was not a petty gesture. It was a forensic erasure of Camilla's footprint from the inner sanctum. It was a visual confirmation of the new order signaling to the staff, the courtiers, and to Camilla herself that the bloodline of the Windsor family was closing ranks. The message was clear. You may reside here, but this house does not belong to you. The British royal family is not a normal family. It is a 1,000-year-old corporation. When a threat to its integrity is detected, the corporate immune system activates. Princess Anne and Prince William did not scream, they did not leak tearful stories to the press, and they did not seek public vindication. They simply used the cold, grinding machinery of the state to lock the doors, cut the funding, and strip away the illusion of power. Camilla had played a brilliant 30-year game of chess, manipulating the board to elevate herself to the throne. But in the end, as the side doors locked and the portraits came down, she discovered she never actually owned the board at all. If you found this forensic breakdown of royal power dynamics insightful, make sure to subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments below. We will continue to track this shifting power structure as the true story of the monarchy unfolds.